Sometimes fact is stranger than fiction. Welcome to another episode of Grim Events. If you like true stories of the strange, macabre, and paranormal, then please click on that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you can be notified every time a new episode of Grim Events is uploaded. Without further ado, I give you 3 true stories that are stranger than fiction. Story number 1. The deadly phone number. Some superstitions hold that certain numbers are bad luck. One cell phone number issued by a Bulgarian mobile phone company in particular actually seems to be connected to the deaths of at least 3 people, all of whom had used the same number before their ominous deaths. Whether a coincidence or not, the unlucky cell phone number 0888-888-88 has since become synonymous with deadly bad luck. The first victim, in fact, was the former CEO of the mobile phone company Mobiltel, named Vladimir Granchov. He died of cancer at the age of 48 in 2001, shortly after receiving the number from his former company. Rumors suggest the real cause of his death was that he was being slowly poisoned by his competitor. However, he did die shortly after receiving the number. 2 years later, the alleged curse hit the next victim of the unlucky mobile number. Konstantin Dimitrov, a Bulgarian mafia boss, was gunned down while having dinner with his model girlfriend and was killed at the age of 31. Investigators suspect it was a hit job by a rival drug boss. The third and final victim to hold the ill-fated number was Konstantin Dishlev, and I probably totally butchered that name, was shot to death while sitting down at an Indian restaurant in 2005. He, like the previous owner of the mobile phone number, was engaged in the underground criminal world. He was also known as a crooked businessman who operated a secret drug trafficking operation. It might strike an observer of this true scary story that these high-profile victims would likely have died with or without the number, particularly those who were entangled in drug trafficking. But the fact that all 3 men died within a 2-year period of receiving the mobile phone number is kind of interesting. So let me know what you think. Could this number truly be a deadly number, or is it all just coincidence? Story number 2. The Tucker telephone torture device. Of all the true scary stories about life inside America's jails, the Tucker telephone is surely one of the most awful. And for inmates doing time at the Tucker State Prison Farm in Arkansas in the early 1960s, there was nothing more terrifying than the Tucker telephone. The Tucker telephone was a sadistic method of punishment frequently used on prisoners at the State Farm, which is now the Tucker Unit of the Arkansas Department of Correction. The torture device was the brainchild of prison physician Dr. A.E. Rollins and prison superintendent Jim Burton. On its face, the device looks like an old crank telephone, but with the addition of an electric generator and 2 dry cell batteries, it became one of the most notorious torture machines in the history of U.S. incarceration. Hooked up to a source of immense electric power, the Tucker telephone functioned as an electric shock device attached to the private parts of victims. Inmates sent to the, quote, hospital room were strapped down to a table with 2 wires applied to their skin. The ground wire was wrapped around their big toe, while the hot wire, which the electricity ran through, was strapped to the inmate's genitals. Once the doctors turned the crank on the Tucker telephone, their victims were brutally shocked by torrents of electricity. Sometimes these torture sessions dragged on for long periods, known as, quote, long-distance calls. The sheer barbarism of this punishment method was described in Tom Merton's shocking 1970 book, Accomplices to the Crime, The Arkansas Prison Scandal. A quote from one of his books states, in, quote, long-distance calls, several charges were inflicted, of a duration designed to stop just short of the inmates fainting. Sometimes the quote telephone operator's skill was so defective that the sustained current not only caused the inmate to lose consciousness, but resulted in irreparable damages to their testicles. Tragically, many of the prisoners not only ended up with permanent organ damage, but also suffered from mental illnesses following the torture. But the Tucker telephone wasn't an isolated incident. A Newsweek report from 1967 revealed that prisoners were routinely beaten with paddles, had needles stuck under their fingernails, tortured with pliers, and punished using an electric chair. The brutality of the prison became so famous that the Tucker telephone eventually found itself depicted in the 1980 film Brubaker. Unfortunately, even after the torture device was no longer deployed against inmates, the Tucker telephone was reported to be used by the Chicago's Violent Crime Unit under Lieutenant John Burge to torture suspects in the 1980s. American interrogators abroad have also reportedly used the device to torture their captives. So tell me what your thoughts are on this Tucker torture device. If you want to know what I think, here it is.
Dude, this is pretty f***ed up right here.
Story number 3. The terror of Operation Wandering Soul. If there's anything more effective than physical weapons to defeat enemy soldiers in war, it's psychological terror. That's just what U.S. troops employed during their invasion in the Vietnam War. In Vietnamese culture, giving a proper burial to a loved one in their birthplace ensures their contentment in the afterlife. If not, it's believed the deceased soul will wander aimlessly as it tries to find its way home. U.S. forces in Vietnam were aware of this belief and took advantage of it to cause terror. Knowing that the Vietnamese people were worried many of their soldiers would die far from their home and unable to be properly buried, U.S. forces employed a freaky psychological scare tactic known as Operation Wandering Soul. The 6th Psychological Operations Battalion, known as 6th PSYOP of the U.S. Army, broadcasted disturbing moans of disembodied voices throughout the Vietnam jungle where the battles took place. These fake tapes were played on a series of loudspeakers or dispatched from overhead planes. For many Vietnamese soldiers, hearing the cries of supposedly lost souls piercing through the dark was nothing short of terrifying. The scare tactic was inspired by the quote Ghost Army of World War II, a unit of inflatable tanks and personal carriers used to fool German intelligence forces into thinking that Allies had more troops and tanks than they actually did. These hair-raising messages that played in the Vietnam battle successfully convinced many nervous Vietnamese soldiers that their fallen comrades were skulking invisibly among them. Many of the fake ghost messages recorded were created with the help of South Vietnamese allies and voiced pleas to the soldiers to give up the fight. Some would say things like, "My friends, I have come back to let you know that I am dead. I am dead. Don't end up like me. Go home, friends, before it is too late." The tapes were convincing enough to send hundreds of men fleeing from the mountains. Of course, not all Vietnamese soldiers fell for the spooky psychological operation. But even in the midst of war, it still struck a chord. The soldiers who remained fired in the direction of the eerie voices, reminding them of the very real possibility that death awaited them if they were defeated. And we all know how Vietnam ended. Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know what you think of these 3 interesting stories that were stranger than fiction. If you have not already, please like and subscribe to our channel so you can be notified every time a new episode of Grim Events is uploaded. And have a blessed day.